The morning light, pale and hesitant, filtered through the shears in my bedroom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the quiet air. I ran a practiced hand over the crisp fabric of the black gown draped across the armchair, smoothing out an imaginary wrinkle, my heart a dull thump against my ribs. The cap, stiff and unfamiliar, lay beside it, its tassel a defiant splash of gold against the dark cloth. Today was the day, the culmination of years of quiet, often lonely effort. I picked up the tassel, feeling its silken weight, and a fragile, almost forgotten sense of triumph bloomed in my chest. It felt both impossibly and intimately close. This moment I'd once only dared to dream of. A faint sound from downstairs, David clearing his throat. The clink of a coffee cup pulled me back. I knew what lay ahead. The carefully neutral expressions, the forced smiles, the subtle undercurrent of bemusement that always seemed to follow my scholastic pursuits. They'd come, of course. My husband and children would be there, sitting in the rows, observers to an event they'd never truly understood or endorsed. I was acutely aware of how much I had fought for this, not just against the coursework, but against their unwitting dismissiveness, their casual certainty that this was a folly for someone my age. Just then, my phone buzzed, with an incoming text, flashing across the screen. "Mum, are you really sure you need to do this? It's just a ceremony." The message, from Charlotte, landed like a small cold stone, a stark reminder that even on this day, the chasm between us remained, threatening to swallow the hard-won pride I clutched so tightly. The quiet hum of the old refrigerator, a steady and rhythmic presence, had become the soundtrack to my new life. It was a sound David rarely seemed to notice, accustomed as he was to years of ambient noise, the children's laughter, the murmur of the television, the endless clatter of family life. But for me, in the sudden, vast silence of an empty nest, it was a constant, almost palpable reminder of what was no longer there. I often found myself leaning against the cool kitchen counter, listening to it, a strange solace in its steadfast rhythm. Its consistency was a stark contrast to the shifting sands of my identity, now that my chief roles as mother and constant orchestrator had, quite abruptly, ended. David had retired 2 years prior, a move he heralded as freedom, a well-deserved respite after decades in finance. Our children, Michael and Charlotte, were long out of the house, building their own lives, their own careers, their own bustling households. That rarely included quiet. I had imagined this season of life would be filled with leisurely mornings, perhaps a renewed focus on gardening, or finally tackling that stack of classic novels I'd meant to read. Instead, a peculiar void had settled in, an unexpected hollowness where the vibrant demands of motherhood once resided. It wasn't boredom, not precisely, but a subtle sense of being, untethered. My purpose, so clearly defined for so long, had fractured into a million tiny, unmoored pieces. It was during these moments of quiet reflection, often while folding laundry still warm from the dryer or watering the thirsty geraniums on the porch, that the whisper began. A memory, soft at first, then growing more insistent, the girl I used to be, the one who devoured books well past midnight, hiding a flashlight under her covers, the one who argued passionately about philosophy in high school debates, the one who dreamed of a life filled with ideas, analysis, and the thrilling pursuit of knowledge. That girl had been put on hold, her aspirations gently sidelined to make way for a different, equally important life. A life of carpools, school plays, scraped knees, and the boundless love of raising a family. But the pause had stretched into decades, and now, in this new silence, she was stirring, demanding attention. The university brochures appeared almost by accident, a forgotten stack shoved into an old cardboard box in David's study, remnants of an executive education program he'd briefly considered years ago. He'd deemed them too much effort, too late in his career, and they had languished, gathering dust. But as my fingers grazed their glossy pages, a different section caught my eye, a small, unassuming paragraph about continuing education designed for lifelong learners, lifelong learner. The words resonated, a clear, sharp note cutting through the ambient hum of my quiet life. It wasn't about a career, not anymore, not about proving anything to anyone in the traditional sense. It was about filling that precise emptiness, about feeding a part of myself that had been starved for decades, a part I hadn't realized was still so very hungry. I began my research discreetly, almost clandestinely, night after night, after David had retreated to his elaborate nightly ritual of news and sleep. I would slip back to the quiet glow of the laptop, online courses, degree programs, prerequisites. The terminology was daunting, a complex map I was determined to decipher. There was a secret thrill to it, a subtle rebellion blooming in the quiet hours. It felt exhilarating, terrifying, and profoundly private. This was mine. It felt like reclaiming a piece of my own soul, a treasure unearthed after years of being buried under the beautiful, demanding edifice of family life. The internet became my confidant, its anonymous search bars absorbing my hesitant queries. I explored programs in literature, in history, even in psychology, each click feeling like a step further into a world I'd abandoned, but never truly forgotten. The application forms were intimidating, requiring transcripts from a lifetime ago, personal essays that felt both confessional and audacious. I wrote drafts and tore them up, wrestling with the vulnerability of putting this latent desire onto paper. The first time I finally gathered the courage to broach the subject, it was over Sunday brunch, a meal typically reserved for updates from the children, their triumphs, and minor grievances. "I've been thinking," I began, trying to inject a note of casual deliberation into my voice, as if discussing a new perennial for the garden, "about possibly taking a class at the university, just one, maybe, to see." David paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips, a flicker of something unreadable. Was it surprise? Dismissal? In his eyes. Michael, bless his well-meaning heart, stopped chewing his bagel, a piece of cream cheese clinging to the corner of his mouth, and Charlotte, ever direct, ever pragmatic, just blinked. "Mum," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, yet laced with what I recognized instantly as a profound, almost painful pity. "Aren't you a bit old for all that? Shouldn't you just be enjoying your freedom now? Travel, your hobbies, you've earned it." Her words, meant to be comforting, landed like a punch. Old? What did that even mean? I was 58, yes, but full of energy, with a mind that felt sharper, more eager than it had in years. "It would be a hobby, dear," I replied, trying to keep my voice even, despite the sudden familiar heat rising in my cheeks, the familiar sting of being underestimated, of being neatly categorized, was a bitter taste in my mouth. David, ever the practical one, chimed in. "Evelyn, tuition's not cheap, even for a single course. And your time, wouldn't you prefer to spend it doing things together? Retirement is about shared experiences, isn't it?" He gestured vaguely between us, implying that my quiet academic pursuit was a betrayal of our shared future, a selfish indulgence. Their combined skepticism, their subtle condescension, stung more than any outright disapproval possibly could have. It was the assumption that my intellectual curiosity had an expiration date, that my worth was now solely defined by my role as wife and mother, or worse, by my age. Their voices, layered with thinly veiled concern, became a chorus of doubt. They didn't see the hunger, the yearning. They only saw the potential inconvenience, the perceived eccentricity. That night, lying in bed beside David's steady, even breathing, the hum of the refrigerator seemed to mock me. Their words echoed, amplifying the insidious voice of self-doubt that had always lurked in the shadows. "Too old. What's the point? You'll be the oldest one there. Everyone will stare. But then, another voice, quieter but fiercely persistent, began to assert itself. The voice of that girl, that hopeful, the curious girl, who refused to let her dreams completely fade. It wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving something to myself. It was about reclaiming my name, Evelyn, beyond Mum or David's wife. The next morning, with a quiet, resolute certainty that felt both terrifying and exhilarating, I pulled out the completed application forms from beneath the stack of David's business magazines. My hand didn't tremble as I triple-checked the entries, my signature firm, unyielding. It was an act of defiance, yes, but more profoundly, an act of self-reclamation. I mailed the application that afternoon, sealing my fate and charting a course towards a future I wasn't just observing, but actively creating. The acceptance letter arrived quietly, tucked between utility bills and junk mail. No fanfare, no dramatic music, just a thin envelope, confirming my improbable leap. Holding it, I felt a peculiar mix of exhilaration and dread. This was real. I was actually doing this. The first day of classes dawned with a crispness that belied the inner turmoil churning within me. I dressed carefully, choosing a sensible skirt and blouse, trying to project an air of quiet confidence I didn't quite possess. The university was a sprawling canvas of modern architecture and ancient trees, a labyrinth of buildings connected by winding pathways, teeming with youth, so much youth. Everywhere I looked, faces fresh out of high school, vibrant with an almost intimidating energy, bustled past me. I felt like an anthropologist, observing a foreign tribe, an alien in my own skin, my sensible shoes clunking a rhythm profoundly out of sync with their hurried strides. My first class, Introduction to Literary Theory, was in a cavernous lecture hall, rows upon rows of seats, most already occupied by a sea of heads bent over laptops, fingers flying across keyboards. I found a seat near the back, trying to be inconspicuous, my stomach tied in knots. The professor, a young woman with vibrant purple streaks in her hair, spoke with a rapid-fire cadence about Foucault and Derrida, concepts that felt both utterly foreign and profoundly removed from the world I inhabited. My pen hovered over my notebook, utterly useless. How was one supposed to take notes when the very language felt like a coded message? It was humbling, almost terrifying. I felt a visceral pang of longing for the familiar comfort of my kitchen, the predictability of my routines. The technological hurdle proved to be a formidable adversary. My laptop, a gift from Michael years ago, was primarily used for emailing family photos and online shopping. Now, I was confronted with online portals, student email accounts, learning management systems like Canvas or Blackboard, alien landscapes filled with cryptic icons, and endless drop-down menus. I spent hours wrestling with them, the cursor a tiny, mocking demon on the screen. Submitting my first assignment online felt like launching a rocket to the moon. I'd type, delete, retype, convinced I was doing it wrong, that the entire system would crash because of my fumbling fingers. There were tears of frustration, quiet, hot tears, shed in front of a glowing screen, the weight of my inadequacy pressing down on me. David, noticing my late nights, would occasionally mumble, "Still at it, dear, don't strain your eyes." His words were meant to be kind, but they only underscored my isolation, the vast gulf between his world and this new, frustrating one. I was attempting to navigate. The library, once a place of serene refuge, became a battleground. The hushed whispers, the intense gazes fixed on screens, the shelves upon shelves of academic tomes. It all felt overwhelming. Finding a book was no longer a simple matter of browsing. It required navigating complex online catalogues, understanding call numbers, and deciphering the labyrinthine Dewey Decimal System, or whatever new system they employed. I longed for the familiar comfort of our local public library, where Mrs. Henderson still knew me by name and could point me directly to the latest historical fiction. Here, I was just another anonymous face, struggling silently. My writing skills, once capable of crafting eloquent letters and persuasive school fundraising pitches, felt rusty, inadequate. The first essay assignment, analysing a dense poem by T.S. Eliot, sent me spiralling. The clear, concise prose I was accustomed to writing felt childish, unsophisticated. The professor's feedback, scrawled in red pen, picked apart my sentence structure, my lack of academic citation, my simplistic interpretations. "More critical engagement, Evelyn," she'd written, a phrase that haunted my thoughts. I spent hours poring over textbooks on academic writing, feeling like I was learning to walk again, each step clunky and uncertain. There were moments, late at night, when the thought of simply giving up, bowing out gracefully, felt like an intoxicating relief. What was I doing here? Wasn't David right? Was I just too old for this? But then, tiny victories would emerge, like fragile shoots pushing through concrete. The first time I successfully submitted an assignment online without a meltdown. A quiet surge of triumph coursed through me, understanding a complex concept after hours of rereading, that aha moment when the professor's rapid-fire lecture finally clicked into place, finding the correct library section on my own after several embarrassing wrong turns. These small acts of defiance against my own limitations began to accumulate, forming a slender, resilient thread of self-belief. I started noticing not only the young faces in the lecture halls, but the subtle frowns of confusion, the hurried whispered questions that suggested I wasn't the only one struggling. We were all learning, just at different paces, with different inherited skill sets. One particularly frustrating afternoon, after battling with a recalcitrant PDF document that refused to open, I nearly slammed my laptop shut. My hands trembled with exasperation. "This is ridiculous," I muttered to the empty room. "I'm too old for this nonsense." But even as the words left my lips, a stubborn core within me recoiled. This wasn't about being too old. It was about being new. Everything felt new again, and new was always hard. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded myself of the feeling of defiance that had propelled me to enroll, the casual certainty of my children, the weary skepticism of my husband. This wasn't just about getting a degree, it was about proving to myself that I could still learn, still grow, still challenge the comfortable confines of expectation. And with a renewed, albeit shaky, resolve, I tried again, slowly, deliberately, until the stubborn document finally yielded, revealing the reading assignment for the next class. Each small victory, each conquered hurdle, reinforced a growing awareness this journey, though arduous, was slowly, imperceptibly, reintroducing me to a stronger, more capable version of myself. The initial weeks there had been a blur of technological frustration and academic bewilderment. I felt like a deep-sea diver, dropped suddenly into an alien ocean, struggling to understand its currents and creatures. My only comfort was the quiet solitude of my study at home, where I could grapple with the foreign concepts and challenging assignments, without the watchful gaze of younger, sharper minds. Yet, as the semester wore on, a subtle shift began. The anonymous sea of faces in the lecture halls began to resolve into individuals. I started noticing not just the youthful exuberance, but also the tired eyes of students juggling part-time jobs, the furrowed brows of those grappling with complex ideas, the quiet anxiety that pulsed beneath the surface of their confident strides. They weren't just the youth, they were people, each on their own journey. It began almost imperceptibly. In the fluorescent glare of the university's main library, I was, predictably, wrestling with a particularly stubborn database, convinced that the article I needed had simply vanished into the digital ether. My muttered frustrations must have been audible, because a voice surprisingly gentle and accented with a slight lilt broke through my concentration. Having trouble with the JSTOR link? I looked up to find a young woman, no older than my daughter Charlotte, standing beside my Carol. She had striking dark eyes, a nose ring, and a cascade of bright blue hair. Her name, I would soon learn, was Maya. She was an international student studying astrophysics and possessed a preternatural calm that belied her unconventional appearance. "It's always a bit finicky," she offered, already leaning over my shoulder, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with a speed and confidence that left me breathless. Within seconds, the elusive article materialized on my screen. "Oh, thank you," I stammered, genuinely relieved. She just smiled. "No worries, took me weeks to figure it out too, when I first got here." That small act of kindness became a thread, then a rope. Maya and I started encountering each other in the library, in the bustling student union, even occasionally in the long lines at the campus coffee shop. She was studying astrophysics. I was dissecting 19th century novels. Our worlds seemed entirely disparate, yet a connection, born of shared struggle and mutual respect, grew between us. She saw me not as an aging curiosity, but as a fellow student, someone striving. She never patronized. Instead, she explained complex digital processes with infinite patience, often drawing diagrams or creating step-by-step notes for me. In return, I found myself sharing anecdotes from my life, offering a different perspective on historical events, or simply listening as she excitedly detailed the latest discoveries in dark matter. Her curiosity about my experiences surprised me. "It's like having a living textbook," she once joked, but her eyes were bright with genuine interest. Professor Davies, my literary theory instructor, was another unexpected ally. Initially, I had been intimidated by her rapid-fire lectures and her sharp, incisive questions. Her red pen critiques on my early essays had felt surgical, exposing every flaw. Yet one afternoon, after a particularly engaging lecture on narrative voice, I lingered, hesitant, after class. "Professor Davies," I began, my voice feeling oddly small, "I appreciate your feedback, but sometimes I feel disconnected from the material, like I'm trying to speak a language I don't fully understand." She leaned against her desk, her bright purple hair a startling contrast to her tweed jacket. "Evelyn," she said, her voice softer than I expected, "you bring a unique perspective to this class. Your life experience is a valuable asset, not a hindrance. Don't be afraid to lean into that. Your lack of theoretical jargon is actually a strength. It gives you a fresh way of seeing things." Her words were a balm, affirming my intuition that my age and experience weren't solely handicaps. She encouraged me to connect the abstract theories to real-world applications, to write with my own voice, even if it wasn't yet perfectly formatted for academia. These interactions began to chip away at the fortress of self-consciousness I had built around myself. I noticed that when I spoke in class, my contributions were often met, not with dismissive glances, but with genuine attention. Some of the younger students, perhaps intrigued by my non-traditional journey, would approach me after class, asking about my perspective on a text, or simply offering a friendly smile. I found myself, for the first time in years, truly engaged in discussions that extended beyond family logistics and daily routines. My mind, once consumed by domestic orchestrations, was now alight with ideas, debating theories, analysing complex narratives. There was a particular moment, during a seminar discussion on a Faulkner novel, when I offered an interpretation, connecting a character's internal monologue to the experience of grief. An interpretation drawn directly from my own life experience, from observations I'd made. Over decades, the room went quiet, and then Professor Davies nodded slowly. "Excellent observation, Evelyn," she said, "a nuance usually missed by those who haven't lived enough to feel it." A warmth spread through me, a feeling of validation that went far deeper than a good grade. The library became less of a battlefield and more of a sanctuary. The buzzing cafeteria, once overwhelming, now held the promise of shared laughter with Maya over lukewarm coffee. My initial feeling of being an old woman on campus slowly, imperceptibly, began to fade, replaced by a nascent sense of belonging. I was no longer just a woman of a certain age, trying to blend in. I was Evelyn, the student. The transformation wasn't instant, but it was fundamental. I still carried my concerns from home, the subtle pressures and unspoken judgments. But now, on campus, I had a growing community who saw me differently, who appreciated the unique lens through which I viewed the world. It was a powerful, intoxicating feeling, one that fueled my determination and reminded me why I had embarked on this improbable journey in the first place. The fear of being judged began to recede, replaced by the quiet hum of intellectual curiosity and the blossoming of unexpected friendships. As my academic life blossomed, so too did the subtle, almost imperceptible fissures in my home life begin to widen. The initial dismissiveness from David and the children had by now solidified into a weary acceptance. But it was an acceptance tinged with a quiet resentment. My days, once neatly structured around domestic rhythms, meal preparations, household maintenance, anticipating David's needs, were now dictated by lecture schedules, library hours, and looming assignment deadlines. The once familiar hum of the refrigerator, a comforting backdrop, now seemed to mock the growing silence between David and me. Dinner, once a cornerstone of our day, became an exercise in careful navigation. I found myself constantly checking my watch, rushing through meals to get back to my books, or arriving home late, exhausted, but invigorated by a demanding study session. David, accustomed to punctual home-cooked dinners, would often greet me with a silent, pointed glance at the clock or a sigh as he stirred a pre-made meal in the microwave. "Long day at the library, dear?" he'd ask, his voice devoid of genuine interest, laced instead with a passive-aggressive weariness. He would listen perfunctorily as I tried to share a small triumph, a fascinating lecture, a breakthrough on a tough concept, but his eyes would glaze over. He'd inevitably pivot to the mundane, the broken sprinkler head, the overflowing recycling bin, the latest news about a neighbour's ailing pet. My world felt vibrant, expanding, while his seemed to shrink, clinging tightly to the familiar and the domestic. Calls with Michael and Charlotte further highlighted the growing chasm. "Still doing the school thing, Mum?" Michael would ask, his tone implying I was indulging in a whimsical hobby, like taking up competitive knitting. Charlotte, usually more empathetic, now peppered her conversations with thinly veiled suggestions. "You know, the cruise brochures came today. Wouldn't that be lovely? Or maybe we could plan a spa weekend, just us girls. Before you get too busy with your studies, of course." The subtext was always there. When will this phase end? When will you return to normal? They still seemed unable to grasp the profound nature of what I was doing, seeing it as an eccentricity rather than a fundamental rebuilding of my identity. They weren't actively cruel, but their lack of understanding, their inability to connect with my renewed passion, felt like a constant, low-level emotional neglect. It was as if I was speaking a new language. They refused to learn. I found myself increasingly hiding my academic successes from them. A good grade, a compliment from a professor, an invitation to a study group, these achievements, which filled me with quiet pride, remained unspoken. The thought of their indifferent nods or patronizing smiles was enough to keep the words locked behind my teeth. What was the point of sharing if it wasn't truly seen, truly celebrated? This self-imposed silence, meant to protect my burgeoning confidence, only deepened my isolation within my own home. I learned to compartmentalize. The vibrant, intellectually stimulating world of campus remained separate from the quiet, sometimes resentful, atmosphere of my house. The house itself began to reflect this strain. Dust bunnies gathered in corners I once kept spotless. The garden, my former sanctuary, became a little wilder, its beds overcome with weeds. David, who for decades had seen these tasks as my domain, would occasionally leave a passive-aggressive note about a burnt-out light bulb or a leaky faucet, implying my new pursuits were making me neglect my real responsibilities. He never directly asked me to stop or even to prioritize domestic tasks, but the unspoken criticism hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the life I was supposedly abandoning. He seemed to view my education not as personal growth, but as a direct threat to the comfortable equilibrium of our marriage. His comfort, one particularly poignant incident, cemented this growing divide. It was near the end of the semester, during finals week, and I had a crucial study group for a challenging philosophy course. It conflicted with David's weekly golf league dinner, which he always expected me to attend. I tried to explain the importance of the study group, the complexity of the material, how much this course meant to my overall grade. He listened, his face carefully blank. "I suppose you'll have to miss the Masons' potluck too then," he said, changing the subject, his voice flat. "They were rather looking forward to your lemon bars." There was no argument, no raised voices, just a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a cool, quiet disapproval that felt more painful than an outright fight. I went to my study group, my mind half on Kierkegaard, half on the knowledge that David was at the golf club, alone, probably painting me as the neglectful wife. The weight of his unspoken disappointment was a heavy cloak. It wasn't just David. There were the phone calls from Charlotte, suggesting Mommy and me crafting weekends that I simply didn't have time for, or Michael's casual inquiry about whether I was still playing student. Their inability to see me beyond the roles I had always occupied felt suffocating. I started keeping my textbooks hidden, tucked away in my study, rather than leaving them casually on the coffee table. My notes, once proudly displayed, were now quickly shuffled away whenever someone entered the room. It was an absurd pretense, but it felt necessary, a futile attempt to avoid the constant, subtle judgment. The quiet became louder, not with words, but with the unspoken tensions, the unacknowledged passions, and the growing sense of an irreparable rift between the life I was building for myself and the life my family expected me to lead. I was flourishing on campus, but at home, I felt increasingly like a stranger in a familiar house. The tension at home, a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of daily life, seemed to sharpen my focus when I was on campus. It was as if the emotional friction ignited a deeper spark within me, pushing me to immerse myself fully in the intellectual challenges that awaited. If my family saw my studies as an indulgence or a threat, then I would make it a testament. My early struggles with technology and academic writing began to give way to a burgeoning confidence, a quiet competence that surprised even me. The initial fear of appearing foolish had receded, replaced by a fierce determination to master the material, to truly understand, to drink deeply from the well of knowledge. One particularly demanding course, Introduction to Philosophy, Ethics and Epistemology, became both my greatest challenge and my profoundest reward. The professor, Dr. Aris Thorne, was a formidable intellectual, a man with a booming voice, and a mind that moved with breathtaking speed. His lectures were less presentations and more intellectual sparring matches, demanding active engagement, critical thinking, and a willingness to confront one's own ingrained assumptions. I found myself initially intimidated, my usual method of diligent note-taking, feeling inadequate against the torrent of complex ideas. Descartes' skepticism, Kant's categorical imperative, the ethical dilemmas posed by utilitarianism. I spent hours in the library, poring over dense texts, wrestling with concepts that felt utterly alien, yet strangely compelling. It was during a late-night study session, surrounded by dog-eared textbooks and discarded coffee cups, that a truly transformative moment occurred. I was grappling with the concept of moral relativism, finding myself stubbornly resistant to its implications. I had always believed in a universal right and wrong, a fixed moral compass, but Thorne's lectures and the readings were subtly eroding that certainty. Frustrated, I pushed away the books and simply sat, staring out the window at the quiet moonlit campus. And then a synapse fired. I began to connect the philosophical arguments to real-life instances, not just abstract examples, but situations I had witnessed, personal decisions I had made, the complexities of human relationships. The theories stopped being solely theoretical and became a lens through which to understand the messy, beautiful chaos of existence. I saw how different cultural backgrounds, individual experiences, and even historical contexts could shape what people perceived as right or true. It wasn't about discarding my own beliefs, but about understanding the intricate tapestry of human thought. A thrill, pure and electric, coursed through me. My mind, long accustomed to practicalities, was delighting in the dance of abstract thought. This breakthrough was followed by my first truly outstanding grade, not just an A, but a luminous A+ on a paper analysing the ethics of genetic engineering. Dr. Thorne's handwritten comments in the margin were concise but impactful. Exceptional insight, Evelyn. Your ability to integrate diverse perspectives and articulate a nuanced argument is truly remarkable. Reading those words, I felt a surge of pride so profound it brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't just a validation of my hard work, it was a reaffirmation of my intellect, a direct acknowledgement of the sharp mind I had so long relegated to the background. This feeling, this deep internal gratification, was far more potent than any external praise I had ever received. It was a reclaiming of my own intellectual self-worth. I started seeing the world differently. A news report about a political debate wasn't just a war of words, but an interplay of different ethical frameworks. A historical narrative wasn't just a sequence of events, but a reflection of the prevailing epistemologies of the time. My conversations, even with myself, became richer, deeper. I found myself challenging assumptions, both my own and others, with a newfound surgical precision. This intellectual awakening was intoxicating, a constant source of wonder and engagement. I was living inside my head again, and it was glorious. There were moments, sometimes, when a casual comment from Maya or another classmate would inadvertently highlight the vastness of what I had missed. Did you read that new article in the Journal of Philosophy? It refutes so-and-so's theory from last year. And I would realize that my academic childhood had been spent in another era, another century almost, where such journals were locked away in physical libraries, not instantly accessible with a click. A pang of regret, a brief whisper of if only, would resurface. But it was quickly overshadowed by the sheer joy of discovery, the relentless forward momentum of learning. Despite these triumphs, the occasional pang of insecurity or a dismissive comment from home still managed to cut deep. A phone call from Charlotte detailing her promotion, followed by a seemingly innocent, "So, what are you working on these days, Mum? Any exciting ancient texts?" The veiled amusement in her voice, gentle though it was, still grated. It was a constant reminder that my burgeoning intellectual world was largely invisible, or at least insignificant, to them. This forced compartmentalization, the inability to fully share the most exciting aspects of my life with those closest to me, was a quiet ache, but it was an ache I was willing to bear. The intellectual feast I was enjoying on campus, the vibrant discussions, the feeling of my mind expanding with each passing day provided enough sustenance to counteract their indifference. I was finding myself, truly myself, in the hallowed halls of academia, and that was a reward beyond measure. The quiet student, Evelyn, was emerging, strong, undeniable, and she was simply too busy learning to care about external validation that much anymore. The exhilarating tide of intellectual discovery, while deeply fulfilling, often carried with it a silent undertow, the unseen costs of my ambitious endeavour. As the semesters rolled by and my facility with academic concepts grew, so too did the demands on my time, and consequently the sacrifices I made. It wasn't just about the financial outlay, though that was certainly a factor despite David's pointed reminders. It was the subtle erosion of other parts of my life, the quiet giving up of commitments that once defined me, and the emotional burden of navigating two increasingly disparate worlds. The first casualty was often my social calendar. Luncheons with old friends, bridge club afternoons, monthly book club meetings. These leisurely pursuits, once cherished, became luxuries I could no longer afford. My explanations, initially met with understanding, soon evolved into vague apologies about being busy or having a lot on my plate. It was difficult to explain to someone whose life revolved around manicures and garden tours the all-consuming nature of delving into the nuances of post-colonial theory or the intricacies of biochemical pathways. Their polite, slightly bewildered smiles were enough to make me retreat, choosing the quiet solitude of the library over the well-meaning but ultimately uncomprehending company of my peers. There was a pang of loneliness sometimes, a longing for the easy camaraderie of shared experiences. But it was quickly eclipsed by the urgency of a looming deadline or the satisfying unravelling of a complex problem. My beloved garden, once a riot of colour and careful cultivation, now expressed its neglect in tangles of weeds and drooping blossoms. The vibrant dahlias withered, the rose bushes succumbed to black spot. Daily watering became a hurried sprint, thoughtful pruning a forgotten pleasure. I would catch glimpses of its wild anarchy from the kitchen window and feel a dull throb of guilt. A tangible manifestation of my divided loyalties. David, of course, noticed. "The garden's looking a bit sparse this year, Evelyn," he'd remark, not unkindly, but with an underlying tone that clearly implied responsibility. It was never an accusation, but a gentle reminder of the domestic duties I was supposedly shirking for this hobby. His remarks, though infrequent, landed precisely because they echoed my own silent misgivings. Sleep, too, became a precious commodity. Nights were often broken, fractured into segments of intense study. I would fall into bed exhausted, my mind still whirring with arguments from a philosophy paper or the historical timeline for an upcoming exam. Then, before dawn, I would be up again, fueled by strong coffee, seizing the quiet pre-daylight hours for uninterrupted focus. The physical toll was undeniable. Persistent circles under my eyes, a constant tension in my shoulders, a general weariness that no amount of rest seemed to truly alleviate. I'd catch my reflection in the mirror some mornings and see a stranger, older and more tired than I felt, but also possessed of a fierce, almost defiant sparkle in her eyes. It was the look of a woman pursuing something vital, regardless of the cost. The emotional burden, however, was perhaps the heaviest weight. The constant, unspoken disapproval from David, the feeling that my pursuit was a selfish abandonment of his expectations for our shared golden years, weighed heavily. He never said, "Stop," never directly forbade me. His method was far more insidious, a carefully cultivated air of resignation, a quiet disapproval that pervaded the atmosphere. There were days when I yearned for a genuine conversation, a moment where he might ask with real interest about a lecture or express pride in my achievements. Instead, our interactions became transactional, focused on logistics and mundane household matters. The emotional intimacy we once shared seemed to wither in the arid landscape of his unspoken judgment. I confessed this feeling to Maya one afternoon during a particularly grueling study session in the library. She was sketching intricate diagrams for her astrophysics class while I wrestled with a literary theory essay. "Sometimes," I began, my voice barely a whisper, "I feel like I'm doing something wrong, like I'm letting my family down." Maya set her pencil down, her bright blue hair falling across her face. She looked at me, her dark eyes surprisingly understanding. "It's hard when people don't get your passion, Evelyn," she said, her accent soft. "My family back home, they wanted me to be a lawyer. When I told them astrophysics, they thought I was crazy. But you have to do what makes your soul alive. Otherwise, what's the point?" Her simple, profound words resonated deeply. She understood the internal conflict, the tension between expectation and personal fulfillment. It was a rare moment of true understanding, a balm to my weary spirit. Despite her empathy, the need to compartmentalize my life remained. At home, I continued to downplay my studies, avoiding any topic that might lead to a tense silence or a passive-aggressive remark about my new life. My textbooks, once proudly displayed, were now quickly tucked away when David came into the room. It felt absurd, this constant cloaking of a significant part of myself, this daily performance of being normal so as not to disrupt the delicate, strained peace. But the alternative, direct confrontation, seemed too exhausting, too costly to the fragile peace that remained. My personal journal became my true confidant. Pages filled with the struggles, the triumphs, the joys, and the profound sadness of pursuing a dream that brought me closer to myself, but seemingly further from those I loved. It was a lonely path, illuminated brightly by the flicker of my own rekindled intellect, but shadowed by the persistent feeling that this light came at a steep emotional price. The subtle, internal changes in Evelyn's identity, the blossoming of her intellect, and her increasing self-assurance began to manifest in ways that even her oblivious family couldn't entirely ignore. Her initial fear of being an academic outlier, the token older student, slowly dissipated as her consistent performance and genuine intellectual curiosity garnered attention from professors and peers alike. The world of academia, which had once felt so alien, was now a space where she not only belonged, but actively excelled. The first public acknowledgement came in the form of an invitation to join the university's Honours Society. It was a formal letter addressed directly to her, congratulating her on her outstanding academic achievement and inviting her to an induction ceremony. Holding the thick cardstock, emblazoned with the university crest, Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest that rivaled the satisfaction of an A+. This wasn't just a good grade, it was formal recognition from an institution, a tangible symbol of her success. She left the letter casually on the kitchen table, half hoping David would see it, half dreading his reaction. He did see it eventually, picking it up with a curious frown. "Honours Society," he mumbled, more to himself than to her. "What's that mean exactly?" His tone was neither congratulatory nor dismissive, merely puzzled, as if trying to decipher a foreign artifact. Evelyn explained, briefly, the merit-based criteria. He nodded, put the letter down, and then, to her quiet disappointment, changed the subject to the lawn mower. Yet, a seed had been planted. Then came Professor Thorne's request. Dr. Thorne, the formidable philosophy professor whose classes had so profoundly reawakened her intellectual passion, approached her after a particularly insightful class discussion. "Evelyn," he began, his booming voice surprisingly gentle. "Your contributions to this class have been exceptional. I'm developing a new online module for introductory philosophy, and I'd be very grateful if you'd consider reviewing some of the content, specifically on the ethical dilemmas section. Your perspective, given your unique background, would be invaluable." Unique background. It was a polite euphemism for her age. But this time, it felt like a compliment, an acknowledgement of the wisdom her years had afforded her. She accepted immediately, thrilled by the opportunity to contribute beyond basic coursework. This wasn't just proof that she was capable, it was proof that her perspective, shaped by life, was valued. The news, when she mentioned it to David, was met with a shrug. "More homework then?" he replied, entirely missing the significance of the invitation. The most undeniable sign of her progress, however, came from an unexpected source: the university newspaper. A student journalist working on a series about non-traditional students had approached her earlier in the semester. Evelyn, initially hesitant, had agreed to a brief interview, never imagining it would amount to much. But then, on a Tuesday morning, a small article appeared on page 3, complete with a surprisingly flattering photo of her looking thoughtful in the library. The headline read, "From Homemaker to Honours, Evelyn Reid's Academic Journey." The article, though brief, highlighted her perseverance, her excellent grades, and her intention to prove that education knows no age limit. This news, unlike the Honours Society invitation, did not go unnoticed. Michael, usually absorbed in his demanding career, called her, sounding genuinely surprised. "Mum, I just saw something in the campus paper online. Is that you? It sounds like you're really doing well." There was a hint of pride in his voice, mixed with bewilderment. Charlotte, too, sent a text with a string of astonished emojis. "OMG, Mum, you're famous! What's this about the Honours Society? This is amazing!" Their reactions, while still tinged with a slight remove, were undeniably more positive than anything she had received before. The public validation, it seemed, was harder for them to dismiss. David's reaction was the most telling, perhaps because it was so utterly unlike his usual reserved demeanour. He had seen the article online, alerted by a colleague who frequented the university website. When he came home that evening, he was quiet, more reflective than usual. He didn't mention the article directly, not at first. But later, as I sat at the kitchen table, grading some of Myers' practice astrophysics problems, a delightful exchange we'd started, he brought me a cup of tea, something he hadn't done in months. He sat across from me, sipping his own, observing me with a new expression. Admiration, curiosity. It was hard to tell, but it was certainly different from his usual weary skepticism. "You know," he said, his voice softer than usual, "that Professor Thorne you mentioned, he seems quite well regarded. I looked him up. It wasn't a direct acknowledgement of the article or of my achievements, but it was a step, a small bridge across the widening chasm between us. He was beginning to see me not just as the woman tending to his home, but as an individual with a burgeoning intellectual life, one that was gaining external validation even from sources he respected. The change wasn't dramatic, not immediately. The passive-aggressive comments didn't vanish overnight, nor did the quiet expectation that I would revert to my old self once this phase concluded. But a subtle shift had occurred. A crack had formed in the facade of their unquestioning certainty. They were beginning to see that my academic journey wasn't a whimsical indulgence, but a serious, recognized pursuit. This growing, albeit reluctant, acknowledgement fueled me. It allowed me to breathe a little easier, to wear my intellectual achievements with more open pride. The battle for internal validation was largely won. Now, the more arduous but increasingly achievable task of altering external perceptions had begun. The final semester arrived with a peculiar mix of urgency and nostalgia. The university, once a sprawling, intimidating labyrinth, now felt like a second home. The faces of students and faculty, once a blur, were now distinct individuals, many of whom I could greet by name. My confidence had solidified into a quiet assurance. I navigated the bustling hallways with purpose, my backpack no longer feeling like an alien appendage, but a familiar extension of my academic life. The early days of fumbling fingers and tech-induced tears felt like a distant, almost humorous memory. I was no longer merely surviving, I was thriving, capable of leading study groups, expertly navigating the campus portals, and even offering tech tips to younger students. This last push was characterized by an intensity that bordered on euphoria. Final exams were not just hurdles to overcome, but opportunities to synthesize years of learning, to demonstrate the depth of my understanding. Papers that once took weeks of agonizing doubt now flowed with a newfound clarity, my voice distinct, my arguments well-honed. Each research project, each essay felt like a culmination, a testament to the growth I had undergone. I found particular satisfaction in my capstone project for the literature department, an in-depth analysis of female archetypes in modernist poetry. It was a topic that allowed me to bring together my academic insights with my lived experience, creating something truly meaningful and deeply personal. Professor Davies, my literary theory instructor, who had once critiqued my simplistic interpretations, praised it as a significant contribution marked by profound insight and a sophisticated understanding of the interweaving of text and life. Her words resonated more deeply than any simple grade. As the deadlines loomed and then passed, a different kind of reflection began to emerge. The frantic pace of assignments gave way to a quiet contemplation of what I had achieved, and more importantly, who I had become. The woman who had entered these gates with a mixture of hope and terror was vastly different from the one now preparing to leave. I had not just accumulated knowledge, I had rediscovered a lost part of myself, a vibrant, intellectually curious individual who had been submerged beneath decades of domesticity. The degree, I realized, was not just a piece of paper. It was a physical manifestation of my reclaimed identity, my agency. It represented the monumental effort of chipping away at self-doubt, ignoring subtle societal pressures, and pushing past the well-meaning yet limiting expectations of my family. I started planning for graduation, a process that felt both celebratory and bittersweet. Ordering the cap and gown, a slightly itchy polyester relic, was a tangible step towards the finish line. The university's communications office sent out invitations to the ceremony, and I filled them out with a sense of quiet triumph. Sending one to Michael and Charlotte, I still wrestled with the familiar unease. Would they come? And if they did, would it be with genuine pride or that faintly patronizing air they often adopted? The newspaper article and my Honours Society induction had certainly shifted their perspective, nudging them towards a begrudging acknowledgement. But a fundamental understanding, a shared joy in my accomplishment, still felt elusive. I found myself recalling specific moments of struggle from the past few years, the technological meltdowns in the early days, the frustrating red marks on my first essays, the nights I spent in the library powered by lukewarm coffee and sheer stubbornness. Each memory, once tinged with frustration, now held the sheen of resilience. I had overcome, I had persisted, and in persisting, I had found a strength I hadn't known I possessed. This realization was more empowering than any academic honor. It was the knowledge that I was capable of reinvention, that my narrative wasn't fixed, and that age was merely a number, not a limit. A conversation about graduation with David proved surprisingly muted. I brought it up gently, proposing we have a small dinner afterward. He nodded, almost distractedly. Oh yes, graduation. Of course. Have Michael and Charlotte said if they're coming? His tone was neutral, almost perfunctory. There was no visible excitement, no effusive congratulations. It was as if attending my graduation was simply another item on his social calendar, devoid of any deeper emotional weight. The lack of genuine enthusiasm still pricked, a familiar ache in my chest. He was accepting, yes, but not celebrating. He still wasn't seeing me, not fully. The thought persisted that for him, my graduation marked not a triumph, but simply the end of an inconvenience. The conclusion of a phase that hadn't quite fit into his comfortable retirement plans. Despite all the external validations, this lingering sense of being only partially understood by my closest family often cast a small yet persistent shadow over my profound joy. In the quiet moments before sleep, I would imagine the ceremony, walking across the stage, the rustle of the gown, the feeling of the diploma in my hand. But increasingly, my thoughts moved beyond that single moment. The degree was a marker, a symbol, but the true prize was the journey itself. The intellectual friendships forged, the minds unlocked, the sheer, intoxicating joy of learning. That had been the true graduation. It wasn't just about finishing, it was about beginning anew. And as the days counted down, a quiet, almost mischievous sense of triumph nestled in my heart. They said I was too old to learn, and yet, here I was, stepping onto the cusp of a new beginning, having earned my place not just in academia, but in a future I had authored myself. The morning of graduation dawned with a gentle, almost reverent light. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue, and a soft breeze rustled through the flags decorating the university's main quad. I woke early, the familiar hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen a distant comfort, no longer a source of contention. Today, my focus was entirely on the crisp black gown and the stiff cap laid out on my armchair, their textures almost sacramental in their significance. My heart, a steady drum against my ribs, was a symphony of anticipation and a faint, lingering anxiety. David stirred beside me, and for a fleeting moment I wished for a word of genuine congratulation, a spontaneous hug, but he simply mumbled about getting coffee, and I decided for today to let it go. This day was mine, and I would not allow his muted presence to diminish it. Reaching the campus, the air vibrated with excitement. A sea of black gowns and colourful hoods flowed toward the central assembly points. I spotted Maya, her blue hair a vibrant beacon, already engaged in animated conversation with other astrophysics graduates. She waved enthusiastically, and I felt a surge of warmth. These were my people, my intellectual companions, who saw me for who I was becoming, not who I had been. We exchanged hurried embraces, making promises of future coffee and study sessions. It was a fleeting, but deeply meaningful connection. Finding my assigned seat in the vast auditorium, I scanned the rows for my family. David was there, as promised, seated with Michael and Charlotte. Their faces, though distant, seemed animated, engaged in conversation. A small knot of relief loosened in my chest. They came. That, at least, was something. I took a deep breath and focused on the program, on the solemn procession of faculty, and the anticipation of seeing my own name scroll by on the jumbotron. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches, names called, and the rhythmic applause of proud families. My cohort, the non-traditional students, were called toward the middle of the alphabet. When Evelyn Reed echoed through the hall, I rose, a quiet wave of triumph washing over me. Walking across the stage, the fabric of the gown rustling, felt like stepping into a new skin. The handshake from the university president, the brief flash of cameras, the symbolic transfer of the diploma, each moment etched into my memory. It was real. I had done it. As I walked back to my seat, I caught a glimpse of my family. David was clapping politely. Charlotte and Michael, to my surprise, were on their feet, clapping more vigorously, Charlotte even attempting a small cheer. A flicker of something akin to genuine pride, seemed to emanate from their section. After the ceremony, the quad was a chaotic tableau of celebration. Families embraced, balloons floated, and caps were tossed skyward. I found my family near a prominent oak tree, my diploma clutched tightly in my hand. "Congratulations, Mum," Michael said, embracing me in a way that felt warmer, less forced than usual. "That was quite something." Charlotte hugged me tightly. "Mum, you actually did it. We're so proud of you." Her voice was thick with emotion, and her eyes, to my astonishment, were suspiciously bright. It was then that Charlotte pulled a small, slightly crumpled envelope from her purse. "Mum," she started, her voice suddenly hesitant. "There's something Michael and I need to tell you, something we should have told you a long time ago." Michael nodded, his expression serious. David, who had been standing a step back, now seemed to lean in, his gaze fixed on his children. We tried to get into college, Mom," Michael confessed, his gaze dropping to the ground. "After high school, both of us, Charlotte applied to state and I applied to the community college." My breath hitched. They had never mentioned this, not once. Charlotte picked up the thread, her voice gaining strength, tinged with a raw vulnerability. "I got in, Mom, to state, but I never went. I told you I didn't want to go, that it wasn't for me, that I wanted to start working right away, but that wasn't true. I was scared, terrified, actually. All my friends were going and I just froze. I convinced myself I wasn't smart enough, that it was too expensive, that I'd fail, so I just pretended I hadn't wanted to go in the first place." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Charlotte, my confident, pragmatic Charlotte, had harbored such a secret, such deep-seated fear. Then Michael, picking up his sister's courage, spoke up. "Me too, Mum. The community college was supposed to be my stepping stone. I told you it was too boring, too many intro classes. But the truth is, I failed the entrance exam, not by much, but enough. And then I was just embarrassed, ashamed. I didn't want to tell you or Dad, so I went straight into that entry-level job at the bank and just worked my way up. It was easier than admitting I wasn't smart enough for college." The air around us seemed to thicken, charged with years of unspoken shame and quiet protection. David, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "You two, you never told us any of this." He looked at them, then at me, a profound realization dawning in his eyes. Charlotte reached for my hand, squeezing it. "When you started going back, Mum, we thought you were crazy. We thought you were going to fail, and it would be so painful to watch. It brought up all our own stuff, our own fears. We didn't want you to go through that. We were probably projecting our own fears onto you. We thought we were protecting you, in our own twisted way," Michael added. "But then you kept going, and you started excelling, and you proved us all wrong. You showed us it was possible. You showed us what determination looks like. You showed us that it's never too late to face your fears and pursue something important to you. You really are an inspiration, Mum." Their words, delivered with such raw honesty, cracked open a dam within me. All the years of silent judgment, the subtle dismissals, the feeling of being misunderstood, dissolved in the face of this unexpected, profound confession. They hadn't been judging me. They had been protecting themselves, projecting their own unfulfilled desires and anxieties onto my brave new path. My education wasn't just my triumph. It was inadvertently a catalyst for them to confront their own pasts, their own buried regrets. The tears I had held back for years, tears of frustration, loneliness, and quiet pride, now flowed freely, hot and cleansing. David, for the first time, truly saw me and truly saw our children. He stepped forward, his eyes brimming. He wrapped his arms around me, a full, genuine embrace, unlike any I had received from him in years. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion, "I'm so incredibly proud of you, more than you could ever know." And in that moment, under the bright spring sky, surrounded by the joyous chaos of 1,000 other graduations, I realized that the healing had begun. The diploma in my hand was a testament to my past. But the embrace of my family, finally understanding, was a promise for the future. The graduation ceremony had been more than just a milestone. It was a watershed moment, a powerful catalyst that reshaped the landscape of my family. The raw, honest confessions from Michael and Charlotte, coupled with David's unreserved expression of pride, had cleared years of unspoken tension and misunderstanding. It was as if a heavy veil had been lifted, revealing not just my journey, but the complex, intertwined paths of those I loved most. Life after graduation settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and profoundly new. The intense academic schedule was gone, replaced by a spaciousness I had almost forgotten. But the silence that had once felt so isolating was now filled with a different kind of hum, not just the refrigerator, but the quiet satisfaction of a mind continually engaged. I continued to read voraciously, no longer constrained by syllabi, diving into subjects that piqued my interest. My home office, once a solitary study, sometimes became a vibrant space for intellectual exchange as Maya would occasionally drop by, curious about a philosophical concept or eager to share a new astronomical discovery. Our friendship, born in the sterile halls of academia, had blossomed into a cherished bond, proving that connection transcends age and discipline. The most noticeable and heartwarming shift occurred within my immediate family. David's initial quiet acknowledgement had deepened into a genuine and often expressed admiration. He started asking about my former professors, jokingly referring to me as the resident intellectual in social gatherings. He initiated conversations about topics he'd once dismissed, current events, books he'd seen me reading, even asking for my opinion on complex ethical issues in the news. He began bringing me articles he thought I'd find interesting, sometimes even printing them out with a small handwritten note. "For your consideration, Professor." This newfound engagement was a balm, healing the quiet ache of years of misunderstanding. We started taking long walks together, discussing not just golf scores or garden plans, but ideas, life, and the vast, beautiful expanse of what we were still learning. The emotional intimacy we once shared, previously dimmed by my academic pursuit, now shone brighter, enriched by our individual growth and mutual respect. Michael and Charlotte became my fiercest champions. They spoke of my journey to their friends and colleagues, not with the former hesitant, slightly embarrassed tone, but with genuine pride in their voices. Charlotte, emboldened by my example, began looking into online courses to bolster her business acumen, finally addressing a quiet desire for further education she had long stifled. Michael, too, started volunteering at a local community college, tutoring math students. A quiet acknowledgement of his past struggles and a desire to help others navigate similar academic hurdles. They didn't need to return to college themselves to feel the impact. My journey had simply opened their eyes to the possibility of growth and self-discovery at any stage of life. The ripple effect extended beyond our immediate family. Friends who had initially been skeptical now approached me with curiosity. Some expressed their own long-dormant desires to learn a new skill or pursue a deferred passion. I found myself becoming an unexpected mentor, a quiet testament to the power of transformation. I joined a local writers group, finding a new community that appreciated my honed analytical skills and refreshed voice. I even began volunteering at the university library occasionally, helping new students navigate the very systems that had once daunted me, offering a comforting smile and practical advice. Looking back, the financial cost, the lost social outings, the neglected garden, these unseen costs now felt minor, insignificant in the grand scheme of what I had gained. The years of quiet perseverance, the moments of doubt and triumph in equal measure, had forged a new Evelyn. I was no longer defined by the roles I played, but by the person I was continually becoming. My intellect, once dormant, was now a vibrant, active part of my being, enriching every aspect of my life. The journey from the quiet hum of the refrigerator to the roar of academic achievement, and finally to the symphony of a truly engaged life, had been arduous, unexpected, and utterly transformative. It proved irrevocably that the mind's appetite for knowledge has no expiration date, and that the greatest education often comes when one dares to rewrite their own life story. My life was no longer merely about waiting for the next family gathering or the next planned vacation. It was about filling each day with purpose, with learning, with connection. The hum of the refrigerator was still there, but now it was truly just a background sound, a constant in a life that was finally, fully my own design. I was not just living, I was flourishing, embracing every new horizon with the quiet confidence of a woman who had dared to listen to the whisper of an old dream and found it had the power to make her whole. If Evelyn's journey resonated with you, imagine what your story could inspire. Whether you're considering a career change, exploring a new hobby, or simply searching for your purpose, your unique experiences are your superpower. Don't let fear or doubt hold you back, the way it almost did for Evelyn's own children. This space is all about helping you unlock your potential, just as Evelyn did. We'll share strategies for growth, creative insights, and the real talk about building a life you love. Subscribe now to join our community of go-getters, dream chasers, and people who aren't afraid to start a new chapter. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss the tools, the inspiration, and the actionable advice that could make your next big leap a reality. Let's build something awesome together.